This is typical legal terms. Hopefully you've got your laser-guided eyes tuned in and you've read that all already. Typical sort of thing when we get a piece of software. What do we do? Do we go through all the terms and read it? What does it say? I'm just going to click on the button and move on, shall I? If that's all right with you. So when I'm talking about cyber, what am I referring to? Well, we've got all sorts of areas really covering cyber espionage. And I don't mean James Bond necessarily, not necessarily the best spy in the world. We all know who he is, we all know what he does, he always seems to get caught. Great at not getting blown up, but being a spy, you don't really want to be that obvious. Cyber crime. Espionage, by the way, at the top is predominantly the domain of the Chinese currently. You know, they like to be out there picking up intellectual property. Cybercrime is very big in the Eastern Bloc, you know, APT type attacks, advanced persistent threats, and I'll cover a bit of that as we go. Hacktivism, cyber warfare, cyber terrorism, it's all pretty scary stuff really. And I'll go through one or two of these in a bit more detail as we go. I'm more the hoodie than the James Bond, by the way, as you can probably tell, apart from the suit today. So yeah, just a little bit more about my background, because it is always good to know who's giving you the information. As John says, I have been in security for about 30 years. It's changed dramatically over that time. Started off in the military, in secure communications there, first 10 years of my career, working on interesting things like live nuclear weapons and things like that. So I guess if I was going to do something crazy, that was the time to do it. So hopefully I'm a bit stable in terms of who I am and what I do. I am a certified Chief Information Security Officer, so I do try to keep up to date with the very latest techniques and threats. And I've delivered services over the years really for the likes of the National Police Improvements Agency, serious organised crime. I was at CEOP for a good time. On the child protection team there, so all the online threat to vulnerable people. I was largely involved in all of that, and during the Madeleine McCann campaign, for example, I was there doing a lot of internet-based stuff as well. So lots of covert stuff with security forces in my background. Managing director of a penetration testing outfit that looked after Buckingham Palace, for example, and ensuring that their firewalls and internet defences were safe. So we've done some interesting stuff over the years. One thing I will say, though, is that I really got into this business about 15 years ago in a more serious way, when I myself became a victim of cybercrime. I'll keep the story quite short, hopefully. Going through a divorce, my wife had a jewellery business, and we had lots of jewellery under the stairs, sort of worth probably about £50,000 retail. And we were moving house and all the usual stuff that goes on when you're going through that kind of scenario. And I thought, I need to sell this lot. So what do? There's this newfangled thing called eBay. I'll stick it on there. So did all the things that I thought I should do. Put it on there. People phoned me up. I had a call from where? I had a call from Russia. I thought that's probably not a good one to sell it to. I had a call from France. I thought maybe Italy, and one or two other areas. In the end, after speaking to the people, I decided to sell it to the Italians, and put it all in a box. Sent Secirity down there. Before I did that, made sure all the money was set up in escrow, etc. Checked out the escrow, phoned them up. It was all fine. You're well ahead of me here, of course, and the stuff got down there. Security dropped it off at a secure address, and lo and behold, the next day, everything was gone. The website was shut down, and my goods, or my ex-wife's goods at that point, were all gone. So it's probably just as well we were getting divorced anyway. Yeah, it turned out that it was the mafia that had it all. So I wasn't going to argue with them, to be honest, so I kind of wrote it off. I thought, am I going to get that money back? I know, I'll become a cybersecurity professional and go out and tell people about what happened to me. And here I am. So that's my background very, very briefly. You'll see, if you can read it at the bottom there, my pseudonym, my online pseudonym is Max Hacker. Very obvious, I hear you say. And that's for a reason. When I'm doing vulnerability assessments on a company, I want to see how easy they're going to catch me. And I've used this to make up fake badges, for example, in physical security, and walk through police cordons. You know, it took me 10 minutes to make a badge for a particular company using paint shop, stuck their logo on, stuck my face on it, and with the name Max Hacker. And I thought, I've got no chance, you know, with this badge of getting anywhere. And I did. You know, this was during the G8 summit. I managed to get through police cordons when, you know, there was what they called the Black Flag Army, who were a protest group, a violent protest group, was sat outside a building. So I was masquerading as one of them to get into a building, got into the building, planted some keyloggers, some transmitting devices, and tied that back into attacking the systems of that organization. All with a letter, by the way, signed by the CEO, which makes me very brave. You know, I wouldn't do this stuff without a get out of jail card. So, you know, that makes things a lot easier when I'm doing this. Okay. So to summarize what I do then, it's really about protecting people and organizations from hackers, crackers, criminals, hacktivists, terrorists, thieves, disgruntled employees, spies, social engineers, and nation states. All in a day's work, as they say. Not much to worry about there. And some of you will be aware of the mask here, the Guy Fawkes mask. Anybody come across the anonymous group, seen this before? Yeah, one or two people. It's quite a scary kind of thing if these guys decide to drop you an email, which I've had a few. And you know, this is their brand image, and it's the hacktivist group, Anonymous, that are behind this. And I'll mention one or two bits more about them in a second. You've got another version, the Syrian Electronic Army, who are looking at you guys fairly seriously just now, not dissimilar to this lot. John mentioned earlier on, we do quite a lot of training with journalists, particularly those that are heading off into the wilder parts of the world, the more dangerous parts of the world, and we work very closely with our colleagues at G4S. They do all the physical security, and we do the cyber security awareness training on a hostile environment awareness training program. Some of you may even have been on that one, but good fun if you haven't, by the way. It's all the driving around in cars and escape and evasion and all sorts of other stuff, so, you know, beats paintball. So short plug for them. Yeah, and this is an interesting stat from CPJ, which some of you, again, may be aware of, the Committee to Protect Journalists. And the rising number of journalists who have been killed in the line of duty, these are internet journalists. We're up to about approaching 80 now in the last few years, internet journalists that have actually been killed because of the type of work they do. And for their views and expressing their views. So, you know, online protection is becoming interesting and necessary, really, for certain groups of individuals. So, focus of the session then really is why cybersecurity is so important at state, corporate, and individual level. And throughout the presentation, I'll cover things like staying safe online yourselves. How to recognize a cyber threat. I'll show you one or two that have got me recently. They've been so good. And we'll finish off with a look at some high-profile cases. Anybody aware of just what level of cyber threat our government, HMG, are telling us we're at the moment? And where from? Always gets me this, because this is an interesting one. We're currently at severe. There's only one level higher than this, which is critical. Severe means that attack is imminent. Critical means it's happening. So, you know, from my perspective, we're being constantly attacked daily. So I'm not quite sure why it's not the higher level, but I guess it's the severity of what's coming at us at the moment that they don't want to make it the top level. But yeah, apparently I heard the other day that it's not just these two countries, but apparently 25 of our friendly nations are at it too, big time, attacking British interests. So it's coming from all directions, really. Here's an example of the types of things, for example, our Chinese friends are after. And by the way, I'm not selecting or picking the Chinese for any particular reason. They're no worse or no better than any other state nation on the internet, you know. And if you look down this list, these are the sort of things, these are 16 major projects that we know the Middle Kingdom, it is called, are focused on, the Chinese are interested in right now. Some of them will be no surprise: large-scale oil and gas, water, you know, pollution treatment type stuff, high-definition Earth observation systems. You know, what these things are being used for, why they want them. Some of it pretty obvious, I guess, in terms of national and state interests. But as I say, some of these, you know, I'm sure if the British government, MI5, MI6 were here, we'd have a similar list looking at other nations as well. So not picking on the Chinese per se. I have to say that because we've got a Chinese restaurant on the corner where I live, and I don't want them visiting me later on at all. So the type of attack vectors and the strategy that these guys are looking at, you know, planting information mines. We talk about data. Big data is very topical just now. So using information as a weapon is quite an interesting thing. So if we can chuck loads and loads and loads of information into databases, that can make it quite difficult for an organization to operate. You know, keeping that clean, that information useful and intelligent, that could be a challenge. So that's one approach. You know, again, some of these are fairly obvious in terms of what they do. Releasing clone information is about cloning websites, including passwords, and selling them on to criminal gangs. So it looks like a real website when in actual fact it isn't. And there's a value to that. So from our perspective as a state nation, a critical national infrastructure is very important to us. If any one of these breaks down, it creates a bit of havoc across the country. And there are 9 different sectors that critical national infrastructure focuses on. One might argue that there should be another one, number 10. Anybody want to suggest what that one might be? Military? Yeah, military is an interesting one. Yeah. It isn't classed specifically as critical national infrastructure, but I guess without one you could be exposed. Airlines, transportation, yeah, I think we've got that one. Internet, I like the sound of that one. Yeah, so communications, it could be in there. And in fact, I think that's the point. That's why it's not a specific sector in its own right. It makes it sound, you know, it should be, but it's so intertwined with all of these. It's part of the whole fabric of the critical national infrastructure. So they're not actually pulling it out as a separate entity in its own right. You know, technology, internet within government is critical. Across our health systems are critical. You know, transportation systems is all intertwined and part of the whole piece. That's the argument I hear. Personally, I still think it should be a focus, and it's so critical to keeping things moving. But that's the way it is right now. So here's what the NATO Supreme Allied Commander for Europe thinks right now. This was a statement from him, and I'll just allow you to read that yourself, and then I'll paraphrase it in a second. I think the key message I get from that, and disagree with me if you will, is help. You know, there is a realization, you know, as I say, that all of these things are so intertwined as a result of the internet that they're all cross-fertilizing with each other that it's hard to actually break them down into separate streams. And so the military, as somebody mentioned, is struggling to cope with this world to a large degree right now. Chinese, because the other thing I'm always conscious of when I present this stuff, by the way, is that I'm giving you the Western perception, the typical UK Western perception of the world and the way that the internet is and all the rest of it. The Chinese don't perceive this world in the same way as we do. So it's a bit of a jaundiced view. This was a statement by the architect and founding father of the People's Republic of China, Chairman Mao. And this sits within the Chinese military doctrine in terms of the way that the internet is used. So, an interesting statement, And this was a statement from Cybercom, US Cybercom, which was set up in October 2010 and headed up by Army General Keith Alexander. And see if you see any correlation in any of this stuff. Maybe it's me just putting one and one together and coming up with three, I don't know, but we look at this stuff quite closely. And then let's have a look more locally. Recently, in fact, just last month, we had the UK Home Affairs Select Committee meeting chaired by Keith Vaz, and this was a statement that he made. We're not winning the war on criminal activity, but it's the second part of this statement that I found quite interesting. So the threat of cyber attack to the UK is so serious it's marked as a higher threat than a nuclear attack. That's quite a change in language. Now, I'm a 50-something-year-old. As I say, some years ago I was in the military, and back in those days I really had it drilled into me, the seriousness of the nuclear threat. I've grown up, and my generation has grown up with the biggest threat and the biggest scary part towards little planet Earth is mushroom clouds and radioactive dust and all that sort of stuff. And here we have a shift in terminology that says, well, actually, cyber is a bigger threat to the UK than the nuclear attack. Hopefully we'll stop spending on all the nuclear weapons and start giving cybersecurity professionals and IT professionals a bit more money now to start defending organisations. Let's see. So a seed change, and I'd just like to stick this one up as a bit of history. And looking at some of this transformation, so we've really changed from nuclear buttons, and I'm assuming they're big red buttons, which very few people have access to, only a few people on the planet have access to. And there's all sorts of protocols around who can press them and international treaties and all the rest of it, to this position now where we have the ubiquitous and ordinary keyboard sat in everybody's desks as something that could trigger something pretty drastic. And there isn't a lot of control about that. The documentation in terms of how we operate in cyberspace is pretty limited, non-existent. Geneva Convention doesn't really apply currently. So just taking this this was a piece that appeared in the newspapers, and it's kind of dated by the PC that's here. I used to have one of these. It's the old Amstrad PC with floppy disks. Don't have them. You don't remember those, I can tell. But yeah, those old floppy things you plugged in, and it took 2.5 hours for it to get to the first screen and that type of thing. But we sat there persevering until it happened. So somewhat dated, but hackers can turn your computer into a bomb and blow your family to smithereens. Sickos can wreak death and destruction from thousands of miles away. And this was a tongue-in-cheek piece done 20 years ago. Of course, what do we have now? We have reality. And these things are now quite possible. I sit on a team. We were asked to do a piece for next generation oil rigs and offshore platforms, and looking at the threats to those particular platforms. And they put a team together, and I was asked to join this team. And it was all about security. So there was 3 or 4 ex-special forces guys. So one was an explosives expert, and he had demonstrations of little cone things and how that would blow the hell out of the citadel where you're trying to protect all your people on the rig, etc. We had a maritime expert talking about amphibious craft, on 5-mile zones and all this sort of stuff around the rigs. We had a rigs expert on the design of how somebody can climb up it and get onto the rig, and or how you could take a helicopter onto the rig and take it over from that perspective. I was the last speaker on this particular event, my view was, look, I really don't care about 5-mile exclusion zones. I'm looking at cybersecurity here. If I can connect in to this rig via the internet or over the airwaves, I'm sat in Hawaii with my little keyboard doing a lot of destructive damage. So I'm interested in things like taking over control of their SCADA control systems, messing around with heat gauges and things overheating, or stabilization control systems. I'm doing it all remotely from many miles away. Okay, so don't care about exclusion zones, don't care about how easy or difficult it is to climb up onto these rigs. And these are things that won't deploy in the South Timor Sea for another 15 years. So the engineers are thinking now about how to secure that world. Where will cybersecurity be in 15 years? I don't know, but we have to use what we know today to help defend it. But it was an interesting exercise. So let's have a quick look at the scale of what it is we're looking to protect. Anyone got any idea, roughly, to the nearest million, let's say, how many websites there are out there right now? Not something you think about, is it really? But just for the sake of a bit of interaction, play with me a little bit. 2 billion? 2 million, sorry. Yeah, 2 million. Right, let's have a quick look. About 200 million active websites. There's about 700 million that are not active, or 500 million that are non-active, but 200 million active websites. With about 40 to 50 billion web pages. So that's a lot of information. And then we bring email into the equation. Number of emails shunting around the system per day. 144 billion estimated emails every day traveling around the world. How do you manage all of that lot? Interesting. And here's something that happened not so long back that really set the community on fire a little bit, the security community. China Telecom managed to divert 15% of the world's internet traffic through China, only for a few minutes, 18 minutes, but it was some pretty sensitive stuff from FBI, CIA, GCHQ. These type of places were all part of that harvesting of information. It was a mistake, obviously. It wasn't meant to happen. Yeah, there we go. So pretty scary stuff, but to manage all of that kind of data, that's a lot of information and pretty hefty. Databases must be sitting behind collation of that type of information. And of course, once you've got it, you can spend as long as you like filtering it and going through it to find what you need to find. So, yeah. How many serious security vulnerabilities on websites? About 80% of websites have very serious security vulnerabilities right now. With 142 million known, and I emphasize the word known vulnerabilities. So there's tons, probably as many again that we're not aware of and don't know about. Yeah. So it's a big problem. How stable is the internet? Well, I do ask myself. This happened March 28th, 2013. It may have affected you guys, but the internet slowed down drastically. Why? Because there was a huge bazooka attack, great word. This was on a company called Spam House, who despise spam and they blacklist spam providers. And the spam providers thought, we don't like you, we're going to attack you. And it was a bit different from normal type DDoS attacks or botnet attacks, in as much as it used what they called large pipes, and these guys were getting hit with 300 gigabytes of data every second, whereas previously it was about 50 gigabytes was the hardest or the highest level of attack that we were seeing. And apparently that's tiny. The option for these guys to do something bigger and worse is there. So the internet itself is not quite as stable as we might think it is. And that's just two companies squabbling. You know, that's not nation states having a go at the internet. The North Koreans took out the South Koreans' media. After 2 days, they only had 10% of the media systems back up. So could we take the FT down for a few days? What difference would it make? So I mentioned earlier espionage. The prime rule of espionage: never get caught. So James Bond, eat your heart out. And here's a statement by Richard Clarke, who was the former special advisor to George Bush on cybersecurity. Just read every single corporation, every company in the world with any meaningful data meaning what, has been compromised. Data has been sucked out of every single system. So the assumption that I always ask people to make is just assume your systems have been compromised, because they probably have. So when you're sending emails and things, one of the little tricks I do these days is to try and make the email itself meaningful to the person that's reading it, but a little bit cryptic at the same time, if that makes sense. Yeah? And then if somebody else is looking at it, they go, what the hell does that mean? Challenge with that is I look at it 6 months later and go, what the hell does that mean as well? But you know, if anything you can do to make it a little bit safer is helpful. So what does all this mean in terms of real money and jobs on the ground and people's livelihoods and companies and businesses? Well, this really happened. Nortel, some of you may be aware of. Nortel was a big telco company, and it was discovered that they had for over 10 years, they had a piece of malware sat in their system that was sucking data off, the sort of stuff I've been talking about. In fact, 7 of the executives' emails had been hacked into for that period, including the CEO's. So every email he sent, every communication he made was compromised. Okay? And that really impacted, as you might expect, on every commercial deal that they were talking about with certain parts of the world. The marketing department, the sales department were compromised, so all their commercial deals, their pricing, all compromised. So when you're sitting down to do a deal with somebody and you've got a price in mind and they know what that price is, you're in a pretty weak negotiating position. So this organization actually was a big company, you know, a $283 billion company that was shut down as a result of, partially as a result of APT. There was other things as well, but you know, it certainly didn't help the case. Some attribution, again, to the Chinese on this one. In fact, there's a state-owned company now that has a very similar blueprint and very similar products, which some of you may be aware of, called Huawei, that kind of looks similar to what Nortel used to look like, okay? Allegedly. I throw that word in. Now, Huawei are everywhere in the UK. British Telecom use them quite a lot. A lot of your servers at home will be built, maybe have a BT stamp on it, but built by Huawei in China. We know that there are backdoors in these systems. Backdoor meaning it's compromised and data can be extracted from it. Hell, our own governments are doing that stuff, aren't they? So, you know, why not the Chinese? Which is quite an interesting. I was having this conversation earlier on with one of your guys. You know, at least the Chinese tell you, and we know that they are collecting and monitoring and looking at data and doing all of that stuff. You know, with the Snowden stuff that's come out now, and the Americans doing it surreptitiously and not telling us, you know, who do you trust more? It's kind of a crazy dynamic, really, that, you know, we know what we're getting on one hand and we don't know what we're getting on the other hand. So interesting changes in the world there. The F-35JSF Joint Strike Fighter, that had been compromised so many times that they had to keep going back and changing components, military components, within the system, that it caused huge delays and huge costs to replicate and put right. 550 million attributed extra cost as a result of the organisation being compromised and attacked. And here's an interesting, scary one. You can even go out and become a hacker yourself, and it won't cost you very much to do it. This is a new piece of technology that's just been released by a Russian crew. It's called Black Shades Commander. They have various versions of this. This is one version. And this is a RAT, a remote access tool. And that allows me to take over somebody else's computer and look at things such as, you know, saved passwords, navigate clients to specific websites, local IP addresses, look at your usernames. I can switch your webcam on. I can listen to what's going on in the room. I can look at your files and move and delete and download and do what I want to with those. I can recover passwords. I can reconnect, close, restart, uninstall, pretty much do what I want to do as an administrator on your system if I want to. Cost of this piece of technology, I guess, again, sorry guys, just making sure you're still all with me. Who would pay $500 for something like that if you were that way inclined? It's $100. It's 100. Actually, it's 100 euros. For 100 euros, you can pick up this piece of technology to do all these things. Okay, so that's what we're up against. So this is back to what I'm saying about the ubiquitous keyboard, added to the intent, added to the tools, and these tools are very easy to use, by the way. We're evaluating this software now, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It does what it says on the tin. Okay. If you don't want to do it to yourself, or do it yourself, you can also go out and hire botnets for a day. It's about $70 per day to hire a few compromised or a few thousand compromised machines to carry out attack on an organization. Pretty cost effective if you want to upset a competitor and you're that way inclined. Individual spear phishing attack. If I wanted to pick on a particular executive and have all the information I needed to do a very specific phishing attack on him, that would cost me about $200 on the dark internet to get that kind of information. The old favorite, credit cards with PIN numbers from, pretty cheap these days because it's so prolific out there, about $30 for credit card information. From, meaning the ordinary man in the street, $30. A good credit card with lots of credit on there by the CEO of whatever company costs a bit more, but it has a market value. Okay, so that's the sort of detail we can buy online. This is this is really at the bargain basement end of the market. Just think if you're a state nation with multiple millions to spend on doing this kind of stuff, what you can do. And that's what we saw with an APT called Stuxnet, rather. And Stuxnet was a piece of malware that was a real game changer. This was the equivalent in the cybersecurity world of putting the first man on the moon. You know, or Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile. Major step forward. And it was targeted at specific systems, a Siemens control system in the Iranian underground nuclear production facilities. Underground, deep underground, not connected to the internet. So how did they do that? They did it with a USB stick. Somebody in a compromised agent stuck the USB stick, and the rest is history. That basically, these are the centrifuges, and the software basically had the engineers who were looking after the system thinking that nothing was wrong, yet these things were spinning out of control. They speeded them up a little bit and they started to topple over and collapse. So they set the nuclear enrichment facilities there back by 3 months. That was all it did. It set their production back by about 3 months. It cost millions and millions to produce this piece of technology, but of course, what did it do? It tested it. It's out there in the wild, and what's happening now is that the bad guys are picking up this stuff, re-engineering it for their own uses. So as soon as something gets out in the wild, it's very difficult to bring it back in and control it. So Stuxnet is out there, and even more scarily, Flame was an update to Stuxnet, and it's about 200 times more powerful and destructive. So if we wanted to bring down systems, internet targeted type attacks on specific type of networks, then this is how it's being done now. As I say, no Geneva Convention around all this stuff. It's the Wild West. I thought this was quite interesting. You know, the Americans talk a lot about the Iranians, and this was a statement by Michael McCall, chairman of the entire House Committee on Homeland Security in March 21st, 2013. And it's interesting because, you know, they're redlining us. How far can they go before we ultimately respond? This was after they owned up to Stuxnet and doing the stuff on their nuclear plants. So lots of games being played. Quick look at the hacker community. This is when it used to be, I was going to say fun, but that's not quite the word. When it used to be less serious. And I'm going back to about the 1970s here, so just about the time Apple was forming. And this guy here is, in the top corner, is a guy called, well, he was named Captain Crunch after this little blue whistle. And what he discovered was that if you put a bit of chewing gum in one of the holes in this little blue whistle from a cornflakes packet, you could make free international calls around the world. You know, the noise that it made was about 2.6 kilohertz, which was the same frequency as the exchanges, the telephone exchanges. So that noise that, you know, you get type stuff was exactly what this was doing. And that's where a lot of this stuff started. And this is Steve Wozniak in the bottom here, you know, phreaking so easy, cavemen can do it, and that's what it originally was called, phone phreaking. The guys that started Apple built this little blue box and used it to basically hack telephone lines to make free calls. So some of the history there. Steve Jobs once stated that if it didn't have these little illegal blue boxes, Apple would never have been. So, you know, interesting how history catches up with us. Some of the bad guys that are doing this just putting a bit of a face to it. I've mentioned Captain Crunch there already. They've got some great names, haven't they? This guy called John Draper, and again, he worked with Apple in the early days, designing some of their systems. Comrade was the first juvenile to be caught basically and banged up for his crimes. He was 15 when he was caught hacking into the New York Times and went to prison at the age of 16 for hacking. So a bit of a landmark. Dark Dante, he was interesting. Kevin Poulsen. He hacked into a radio station. They had a competition where if you were the 102nd caller, you won a brand new Porsche. And, you know, all the fellas go, yeah. And he hacked the system and obviously made himself the 102nd caller, so he got the Porsche, you know, so useful. He was doing other stuff as well, by the way. He was breaking into FBI systems and things, so it wasn't just that, but at least he put it to good use, I guess. Condor, this is a chap called Kevin Mitnick, who's probably the most famous hacker on the planet currently. He was the most wanted man on the planet at one point by the FBI. He's now a consultant in cyber security. The homeless hacker down in the right here, he was called the homeless hacker because his mum wouldn't let him work at home, and he had to go to internet cafes to do what he was doing and to hack into, government facilities. He was eventually caught and imprisoned there. His mum was terribly upset, and he wasn't allowed to use his computer for a few months at home. Robert Tappan Morris, one of the first viruses, the Morris worm. This is the guy in the middle with the glasses here. He did it by a bit of mistake, really. He was just trying to, in his own words, test how big the internet was. So he put out a piece of software just to try and capture it all. The trouble was it brought the bloody internet down, what he did, and he got into lots of trouble for that. And probably the nastiest of all of these guys is this guy here, Albert Supnazi Gonzalez. He's a credit card cloner, and the FBI were after him for a long time. Pretty nasty from that perspective. He was also a double agent with the FBI and catching people with his own community. And he split on these guys. So this is homegrown criminals. Joe Pari, Jake Davis was at the top of Anonymous and LulzSec, so really very high up in those particular hacktivist groups. He was 18 at the time when he was first identified. He lived in the Shetlands, a small western island called West Yell, which was literally 3 sheep and a post office. His hobbies, by the way, are apparently knitting, one of his hobbies. And these are the most wanted people on the planet, by the way, so I'm just trying to put a face on, what's behind some of this stuff. He was arrested recently and is in jail right now. This guy, though, was a bit silly. And these are some of the organizations that you will know that have been hacked. CIA, Sony, Soka, the Sun newspaper, Financial Times down there on the list. But this guy, from HB Gary and Aaron Barr was CEO, he said that he had all the names of Anonymous and was going to publish them. Big mistake. He's no longer the CEO of this particular company, which is a big security organization looking after American defenses, by the way. They're no small organization. But he did a very silly thing. So there might be a bunch of kids, etc., but they are still quite dangerous if they want to be. And dangerous, this is what I mean by dangerous. So you think about some of these young fellas, 19 to 23-year-olds, and apparently the SEA guys are sort of 2 people. One is 19, one is 23, the guys that are taking a keen interest in you. So worldly-wise, one would say, how worldly-wise is a 19 to 20-year-old? And they are declaring war on Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who's not known for his diplomacy. So at what point does that become a national threat? If our citizens are making those type of attacks on other state and sovereign nations, how do you control that? That's quite a dangerous, scary area to be, and where we are right now. So that's a quick update. Just a couple more slides now. Some things to watch out for, I'll just throw this in. This is one that got me this week. And I like to think I'm fairly vigilant, spending most of my time in this world. It was a LinkedIn request. Somebody called Graham Norton contacted me and said he'd like to link up. I'm a prolific user of LinkedIn, running a business. It's something I use every day, all the time. So I had a quick look at this particular request. I have no idea who Graham Norton is. So first thing I did was look, there's a view profile button down here. By the way, is there anything you're noticing already about this particular screen that you thought you should have seen that?
Only that I've already done this myself.
You've done, yeah. You and me and lots of other people.
First
Yeah.
time it came through.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a challenge. You know, this is on my iPhone. I'm traveling on the train. I'm doing things quickly. I'm thinking about other things. You know, and that's what happened to me here. But you probably can't see it too well from the back there. But I'll come back to it in a second. So there's a number of links in this that I can click on. I could just accept. I can click on View Profile. And I thought, I'll be careful. I don't know who this is. I'll click on View Profile, which is what I did. Didn't matter. I could have clicked on anything. It wasn't until afterwards I noticed that it says at the bottom here in grey, you're receiving invite emails, unsubscribe, etc. So this email was intended for Lindsay Nelson, student at Pensacola State College. I didn't spot that when I was reading it. It was pretty obvious type thing. By the way, I did click on the, well, you can see here it's member@linkedin.com, so that looks pretty, you know, genuine. Thought it was a real person. So yeah, I clicked on View Profile, and guess what happened? I picked this up. It started doing some pretty nasty things, actually. It said in Russian, lots of Russian stuff coming through with a bit of English. You're downloading 6 applications, and it's all going zhoot, 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 and I'm going, oh shit, I'm trying to, how do I stop this? Switch my phone off, you know? And it's going zhoot, 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 and downloading all these applications. So I knew it was compromised, and it wasn't, I took it back to some of my techies and said, tell me what's going on here. And they said, yeah, you've been hit with the feline leukemia virus. They come up with great names, don't they? The feline leukemia virus. Now, the thing is, if you do a search now on feline leukemia virus, there's tons of it because it's a real virus in cats. So the actual information and trying to find the information on that specifically is well hidden within all this other information. So it was a pretty nasty one. What did I have to do? Go home, restore my mobile phone and set it all back. But I'm still worried that there's stuff on there, to be honest, you know, but that's one of the challenges. So that was one. Be careful, take the extra time just to look and read things. There's usually a clue. There was in this one, I didn't spot it. So that's an obvious one. Here's another one. This one was from Amazon, and I've taken my address out for obvious reasons, but it had the right home address in there. Again, lots of areas I can click on here. Dispatch number, please visit your order on Amazon.co. No tracking information available. Click on that to find out why. And the only reason I picked this up, because I do buy a lot of books from Amazon, is that I'm pretty sure I didn't order Second Reich to Third Reich Germany, 1918 to 45. Clue, okay? Other than that, it's a pretty good phishing attack. So it's really just a case of being vigilant quite often. But a lot of us feel that we're protected by having antivirus software on our systems, and I'll speed up a little bit here. How good is antivirus? Well, let's have a quick look. We pay our $29.99 a year to download an antivirus software to keep us safe and protect us from all this stuff I'm talking to you about, don't we? Yeah? And $29.99 is quite sufficient to do that, isn't it? Yes, okay. So here's some tests that this particular company carries out. It's surveillance, look at attacks and then apply those attacks or those viruses and malware to all the most well-known software, antivirus software systems that are out there, and just see how many they actually pick up. So they get a benchmark comparison. And during the first day, less than 19% of new threats were picked up. And by the way, this is known threats, where people have actually been hacked and suffered from all this stuff previously. So this is just stuff that's out there that we know about. But perhaps the scary figure is that after 30 days, they were only picking up 61, just under 62% of this stuff. So there's a big gap there. Known threats, okay? So unknown threats, not really good. So one of my soapboxes is this is a multi-billion-pound industry, and I think part of the challenge is that the great British public, and I kind of tested this morning. I did a Bright Talk seminar on a cybersecurity summit to a few thousand people and asked them if AV works, and 85% of them came back and said no, yet the industry is still making billions from selling that stuff. which concerns me a little because I'm not sure the integrity of that, to be quite honest. So giving people a placebo to make them feel better when in actual fact it's actually not making a huge impact. Now, I'm not saying go home and take your antivirus off, keep it on there because it is working against known stuff and therefore it has some value. Does that surprise anybody, by the way? Yeah. Some say no, some say yes. Good, yeah. So a couple of predictions and I'll wrap up shortly. The world's first entire cyber war will be fought by 2021. It's happening now. It has been used in places like Georgia by the Russians to shut down systems. 5 to 10 trillion will be lost due to cybercrime. So that's us. And the bad guys will remain ahead as the adversaries will retain the lead. Why? They're so well funded. You know, if they can break into a system, take millions out of it, reuse that to attack another system, they're in a better position than the good guys are to defend against some of that stuff. Okay, so it's scary times. There are some rays of hope. Always good to finish in a ray of hope. Big data technology is coming along that allows us to be more predictive of this stuff. So we can look at networks and see where vulnerabilities are and look for anomalies in data and things that are happening that shouldn't be happening and start to pick up on those and react and respond to them before they actually become a real threat. So some good stuff happening on big data, but that's a topic for another day, but yeah, one for the future. So just to finish then, 2 quotes, one from a modern day leader and one from an ancient leader upon which Chinese cyber warfare is based. Can't do a presentation without mentioning The Art of War and Sun Tzu. And the challenge for most companies is it costs so much money to be the strongest. It's not about being the strongest. It is about identifying areas of weakness and not being the weakest, so that these guys looking at an organization will see something that's well protected, that's got mature systems and defense systems, and go on to the next person. It's that kind of market right now, or the next organization. Okay, so don't be the weakest is really the message right now in the marketplace. I don't know if John would agree with me on that, but that's where they are. And I'll finish off with a quote from a less well-known person,